everyone to the Metropolitan Junior Baseball League's Bobby Bonds Memorial Symposium. This is part 4 of a series that we decided to do this year since we were unable to be on the field due to COVID-19. I'm the executive director for the Metropolitan Junior Baseball League. My name is William Forrester, and the scheduled moderator, Mr. Marvin Jackson, had last-minute complications, and he asked me would I fill in for him. So that's why I'm here. We run into these type situations in baseball, and they call it the pinch hitter. So I'm going to pinch hit tonight for Mr. Jackson, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do, we want all of the guests to go ahead and introduce themselves. We're going to start with Dr. Brooks. We'll get you to introduce yourself, and then tell us who was your hero, what sports figure was your hero when you were coming up? We can't hear you.
Is your mute on?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go.
All righty, thank you. I'm Dr. Yolanda Bruce Brooks, clinical and sports psychologist, and I am a bred and born hometown Richmond, Virginia girl. Grew up playing softball, tennis, track and field, and a sports enthusiast. Currently, I work clinically at a military VA clinic, and I am also a team consultant for an NFL team. My hero growing up was Arthur Ashe. I never met him, didn't know him, but he represented to me the epitome of a class act in terms of his values, his ethics, his sportsmanship in a sport. And he was a trailblazer and someone that fueled a passion I had for playing tennis growing up.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brooks. Next, we'll go to Mr. Willie Harris.
Hello, everyone. As he said, I'm Willie Harris from Cairo, Georgia, a little small town down south. Myself in the hometown of Jackie Robinson, who was my childhood hero, who I learned about when I was a senior in high school, as far as the things that he went through, as far as paving the way for all of the African-American kids who wanted to play this game. Currently, I am working with the Cincinnati Reds organization. I am the outfield base running coordinator here, and I'm currently in Mason, Ohio, working with the taxi squad guys. Just in case someone gets hurt at the major league level, we have them ready to go and perform. So I'm here in Mason, Ohio right now.
And Mr. Harris, who was your sports hero when you were growing up?
Jackie Robinson. Once I learned his story, the things that he went through. I mean, I was a football player in high school, but I'm only 5'9", about 190 pounds, so that wasn't going to pan out too well for me. So baseball was the route that I chose, and thank God, he blessed me with some opportunities, and really and truly, that's all we really need when we have what we have built in us. All we need is an opportunity. That's not only in sports, but in anything. All we really need is an opportunity.
Thank you. Now we're going to Mr. Preston Wilson. Mr. Wilson.
Hey guys, Preston Wilson here. Growing up, I had my father who was a Major League Baseball player, Mookie Wilson. Up close, he was the hero because I saw the work. But outside of my home, Hank Aaron, the way that he carried himself, the consistency that he played with, the things that he overcame, to me was just pretty much like the model citizen for me, and the guy that, I figured, I know I fall short of it, but if I could ever achieve his temperament, his ability to stay calm in all situations, I feel like I've done a lot. So Hank Aaron was my hero.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Michael Paul Williams, you're next.
My name is Michael Paul Williams. I'm a newspaper columnist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the daily newspaper in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia.
And who was your sports hero growing up?
Well, I would have to say also Arthur Ashe would have been one of them. He being from Richmond and being a champion on and off the court. And also Roberto Clemente, because he was a humanitarian who obviously died doing something for his fellow man.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Okay, could we put the slides up, please? And we're going to now go over the house rules for the presentation. For everybody in the audience, if you have questions, there's a Q&A tab at the very top. So please go ahead and submit your questions. We're going to have a question and answer session in the middle of this presentation and then again at the end. So as you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and send them in. Use the Q&A tab at the top. Secondly, we're going to have questions presented to the panelists. Each panelist will have a question directed to them. And after they answer, we want all the other panelists to feel free to go ahead and chime in and answer that same question if you feel that it's something that you would like to address. So that's how the rules are going to go for this particular event. Next slide, please. First of all, we want to give a little history of the Metropolitan Junior Baseball League. It started back in 1966, and it actually started, my father was the founder of the league, and he started the league because I actually wanted to play baseball, and there was no opportunities for African-American youth to play. I actually tried out at several white organizations, and there was an excuse from each one of them why I could not play. And my father then decided to get with other business leaders, African-American business leaders, and get this league started. And of course, back during that time, I can remember sitting back with my father, watching the games, and my team was the San Francisco Giants, and Willie Mays was my hero, sports hero. And my father liked Bob Gibson and the St. Louis Cardinals. So baseball was a big part of my life growing up, and I'm thankful that my father started this league, not only for me, but for the many young African-American and others who had the opportunity to play baseball that wouldn't if it wasn't for this league. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide right here represents, as you see, Jackie Robinson and Martin Luther King, as the civil rights movement and baseball went hand in hand. And we'll talk about that as we go further along with this slide. And of course, in a nutshell, when we talk about our mission, the Metropolitan Junior Baseball League's mission is basically to provide a outlet for African-American youth through the game of baseball to learn about the history of our ancestors and the importance of the African-American institutions that we have, so they'll take pride in themselves and become productive citizens in the future. And what we are hoping to do from this conversation today is to talk about role models and heroes, and how these role models and heroes can possibly lead our youth back to the game of baseball. Next slide, please. Okay, we've just introduced our panelists, Dr. Yolanda Brooks-Bruce, Mr. Willie Harris, Mr. Michael Paul Williams, Mr. Preston Wilson, and we also have Mr. Edward Taylor, from Dallas, Texas. He was the former head coach of Albany State University, and he's now a youth coach for the Texas Rangers Youth Academy. However, he's having some technical difficulty getting on, so we apologize, and hopefully we'll get him on before this session's all said and done. Next slide, please.
I'm here now.
You're here? Okay. You want to give us a brief introduction, and who was your sports hero when you were coming up?
Oh man, I had a few growing up. Again, my name is Edward Taylor. I'm from Georgia, South Georgia. Just like Willie Harris, we actually played ball against each other. But a couple of my heroes growing up in football, Randall Cunningham, and baseball was Jimmy Rollins. I looked up to those guys a lot. I was a two-sport athlete, so I had a few people that I looked up to.
Okay, thank you, and I'm glad we got that technical issue straight, so you can be a part of this panel, and I know you have some good input that everyone's looking forward to hear. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and we just talked about the heroes, and we just put some down, and there's a lot more, but we thought of Hank Aaron, we thought of Willie Mays. During the Negro Leagues, Josh Gibson, which we could come up with a whole lot more, Cool Papa Bell and Satchel Paige, but we put down Josh Gibson. We put down Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonds' son. He was probably the most recent hero. And then of course, the man that we all looked up to in baseball was Jackie Robinson. So these are just some of the role models and heroes in baseball. When you think about it, and when it comes to mind, these are just 5 of the few of the African American heroes that come to mind. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to start out with heroes and role models. You don't always have to be on the field to be a hero and a role model. Off the field, activities and ventures also make you a hero and role model. And with Michael Paul Williams, through his power of the pen, he is probably the best known African-American voice in Virginia newspapers. And at the very first Bobby Bonds Memorial Symposium, it actually wasn't named after Bobby Bonds, the first one, because he was supposed to be here. And he was taken ill and died, I believe, days after the event. But the very first one, Michael Paul Williams was our moderator. And he put an article in the paper about the symposium and what we were trying to do. And unfortunately, it looks like we've been losing ground since that point in time. But right now, the first question is for you, Mr. Williams. And the question is, do you believe the game of baseball and the presence of African-American players in major leagues impacted or in some way influenced social or civil rights policies in this country? And if so, then how? Mike, are you muted? Mr. Williams, are you muted? Is Mr. Williams still in there? Okay, well, we'll just open it up for anyone, any of the panelists who would like to answer that. Does anybody like to answer that question?
Well, I think one of the ways sports influenced the civil rights movement was it really gave us the opportunity to say, look, if these men or women are good enough to entertain you and for you to go out and cheer for them on the field, then why doesn't that thought or that feeling of humanity extend to them as a person? You know, they're good enough for you to cheer and get behind, but when it comes to them having the same type of life as you, you don't feel that necessary. And I think it really got to the point where there was enough embarrassment where people had to start taking that single question seriously. You know what? Why is it okay for us to go to these ballparks, have these people, these men and women entertain us, cheer them on, but at the same time deny them and their children the same rights that we have? So I think, yes, that question in itself was a catalyst in some ways for a portion of the civil rights movement.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any of the other panelists would like to take a shot at that question? Okay, is Mr. Williams back on the phone, on the line yet? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, and we're speaking again of heroes and role models, and Preston Wilson definitely needs to be considered a hero and a role model. And the picture here shows Preston at the MJBL All-Star game in 2012. He volunteered his time to come out and work with these young men so they could see a former professional MLB player and interact with them. He actually coached the team. That's Jimmy Williams on the other side. So Jimmy Williams was one coach and Preston Wilson was the other. I can't remember who won the games, Preston, but I know they gained a lot from being down there with you. So I'm going to present this question to you, Preston. You played in the major leagues, which is amazing, and we'll get to that. But first, your dad was a major leaguer. Most fans remember Mookie Wilson. What was that like for you growing up? You had a built-in hero and role model.
Well, for me, I think it really taught me to not make athletes or entertainers as these superhuman figures, because at home he was just dad. There was no, he didn't wear his jersey around the house. He wasn't always pointing to his trophies. They weren't always these groups of people at the house, singing his praises. It was, did you get your homework done? Did you get your chores done? Did you do what your mom told you? It was just dad. It was just a regular relationship. His job just happened to be a job that had thousands of people cheer for him. So I really think that aspect gave me just a good perception of what a dad is and what an athlete is, or what a so-called hero is. You can't really equate those two because no one knows what that person is at home. So that's why I really wonder sometimes when I see kids or even adults today get disappointed when someone that they like what they do on stage or on screen, they get disappointed in something that happens to them or a bad act that they do. Well, the fact is you never knew that person. You only knew the character or the athlete that was presented to you in that entertainment form. So having my dad at home taught me that the man that you are is not the job that you have. So that's really how it impacted me.
Okay, thank you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, heroes and role models once again. And that's Coach Willie Harris when he was in Richmond with the Richmond Flying Squirrels. I don't know if Coach Harris was aware of it or not, but the Metropolitan Junior Baseball League worked along with the Flying Squirrels, and we're the ones that say, hey, we need a coaching clinic for these coaches that we have that have little experience, but are out here trying to help these young African-American youth playing baseball. So the clinic was put together, and we were fortunate enough to have Mr. Willie Harris come in and be one of the guest speakers. So thank you again for coming out to be a guest speaker. Mr. Harris, this question is for you. You played Major League Baseball and managed minor league ball. How were you first introduced to baseball, and did you have someone personally or a big league role model that may have inspired you?
Oh, well, introduced to the ball game of baseball. I mean, it was just one of those things you did as a kid. All my friends were playing. Like I said earlier, I loved football. I was a football guy, but all of my buddies were playing baseball, and I was, gifted enough. And fortunately for me, I was able to play the game, and I learned a lot more as I grew up. But a guy by the name of Ernest Rouse, who saw me play the game, kind of took me under his wing. They used to have this little league they'd have on Sunday afternoons where all the people go to the park and they play music and you know, drinking beers, whatever, having a good time, got the grills going. And he put me on his team. I was a 15-year-old kid out there playing with adults, and I fit right in. I played pretty good. So that's really who got me started in teaching me the fundamentals of the game and all the aspects of going first to third, running the bases, all of these things that are important now that I didn't know then, but I know now. And just to see Preston here on this call, his dad had me in 2011 with the Mets. So I've been around Mookie a good bit too. So I've been fortunate enough to be around some people who's probably forgotten half of the stuff that I'm trying to learn. So I'm just grateful to have been around Mookie for that 1 year. And he always used to get up, Willie, you can't be doing that, Willie. You can't be doing that. So it was great to be a part of that. And you know, I'm just grateful.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that response. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to move on. I don't see the next slide up yet, but we'll continue to move forward. Dr. Brooks, this question is for you. From a professional perspective, does the lack or diminishing presence of African-American players in the major leagues create a psychological effect on young African-American children, particularly those gravitating toward playing sports? Dr. Brooks, can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that answer fits on two sides of the equation. If a child is exposed to something that they develop an affinity for or a passion for, that occupies their times, that helps their development physically and psychologically, of course, that's something that would be considered an enhancement. But when they have an affinity or a desire and it's denied them because of barriers to engage in, such as what you did, of course, there are going to be affected by that, and most likely in a negative way. Not having access to the equipment, the uniforms, the resources to engage in that. But in a sport, in most sports, and baseball is one of them, there needs to be some mentorship and some measure of support. Usually that's a coach or somebody else that also shares the passion. Baseball isn't unlike many other sports at an early age. It's just really exposure. One of the disappointments I personally have experienced related to baseball, having had exposure to it at a very young age, is that it seems not to encourage the heroes, the participants of the sport, to stay engaged after they stop playing. And that's part of the infrastructure of most sports, to various degrees, where the alumni are still engaged or allowed to be around the sport that they grew up playing and that they love so much. And that for me has been a disappointment. And also the fan engagement, where a lot of times it's difficult for fans to engage in following the sport, because the publicity, the marketing is not the same as it is in other sports. It's not as easy to follow. When you look at some of the more popular sports, baseball had been #1 for a number of years, and then back, I guess it was in the 60s, football began to take over. which is a sport that I'm involved in, along with basketball. And seeing when these kids are first exposed to it happens at a very young age, and it's very easy for them to access it if they can't physically attend the games. It's not so with baseball as much. A lot of the games in baseball are during the day. Kids are in school. They don't have access through marketing and media like they do with other types of sports. And lastly, I'd like to say that my personal exposure in having on my husband's side, his great uncle and grandfather played in the Negro Baseball League. And having visited the museum in Kansas City really opened my eyes to a lot of things that evolved when they desegregated in terms of how access to the game really changed a lot. And I think that was a tipping point that elevated the game to some aspects economically, but then as you talked about, Mr. Bill, losing ground when the competition with other sports emerged through publicity, the media marketing. Baseball really lost a lot of ground, despite the fact it's an international sport. So I do think it affects access. I do think it affects interest. I do think it affects psyche. And baseball is one of those sports you can play for a long time, unlike many of these other sports when you just have 3 years where you can play at a high level. So the answer to that part is yes, but they don't have the nurturance. I don't think the sport itself has promoted the nurturance of the game, and those that passionately want to engage in it for a sustained period of time, I think that's been lacking woefully.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brooks. Would anybody else like to chime in on that particular question? Okay, and the picture you see here is of Dr. Brooks. She moderated our symposium in 2013. Hall of Famer Willie Lanier is on there, and Coach McCraw is down the far end, along with Wilma Leon and basketball coach Daryl Watts and Quincy Mitchell, psychologist out of North Carolina. And that was a very memorable symposium. Next slide, please. Okay. In a recent Sports Illustrated article, Preston Wilson was featured, and he's addressing the problems that are in baseball today, and what life is like for an African American trying to come up through the realms of baseball. So I'm going to go ahead and put this question to Preston, and since he is the feature in this article, and then others can chime in. What is it like starting with at the little league level, which Mr. Taylor probably can talk about, going all the way up to the majors? So Preston, we'll come to you with that.
Well, I think most kids, or most Black kids, African-American kids, find that their community experience is going to be different when you're young kids. Some kids, some neighborhoods have more Black kids, some neighborhoods don't. But the one thing that you do see is there's a tremendous difference in the amount of money that goes into, or that is in programs where the communities are predominantly African-American, as opposed to non-African-American communities. There's a big disparity as far as the economics, as far as the money that goes into it. And when you look at our nation, white families, for every $100 saved, an African-American family has 6. So when you translate those numbers into our communities and programs, you're going to see the facilities not as good. The equipment that young kids have to play with isn't as good. Sometimes kids are forced to travel long distances just to, to play. And there's a lot of discouraging factors. But I think once they're on the field, when you're at the Little League level, things are okay. Once you start getting to high school and you start having to make a choice between what sport is going to be able to allow me to play past high school, baseball becomes slightly less attractive. Well, not slightly. Let me not sugarcoat this. Baseball becomes a lot less attractive simply because in NCAA, there's only 11.7 scholarships for baseball. In basketball, you have enough scholarships to fill the whole team. I'm talking bench and all. I think it's like 15 scholarships for basketball. Football goes way above and beyond that. You got enough scholarships to have the starting offense, defense, and part of the practice squad can all have full scholarships in football. So when you look at it in that aspect, you have kids that are forced to make an adult decision as far as what am I going to do? How am I going to be able to afford college or help my parents afford college? And for them, they can be a mediocre basketball player, a mediocre football player. But if they choose to play baseball and if they don't get that scholarship or don't get that help, or if they aren't the top player, one of the top players in the area, it's tough to go home to your parents and say, I realize I'm not getting drafted early in baseball, but I want to play baseball. And, I need you guys to help me out with half the scholarship because nobody's getting full scholarships these days. It's a really daunting thing to look at your parents and have to try to explain that. So you have a lot of kids going to other sports. When you get to the major leagues, you start seeing those numbers dwindle at each level. You might see a lot of black kids in A-ball. When you get to AA, the numbers are fewer. When you get to AAA, the numbers are fewer. And when you get to the major leagues, by the time I got there, I believe it was 11 or 12% African-Americans in the big leagues. And that was coming down from 27% at its peak. So you have a lot of guys in the major leagues who are living very lonely experiences of being an African-American guy on their team. And now what I'm about to say now goes all through all the levels, high school, minor leagues, and major leagues. You find yourself constantly assimilating. You find yourself constantly adapting your personality, your interest to fit into what everybody else does or likes because you want to be part of the team. Nobody wants to be that outcast that doesn't laugh at the jokes, that doesn't know all the punchlines from the movies. You want to fit in. You want to be part of the team. The problem with that is that it usually doesn't extend the other way. There's very few instances where I've been on a team where, I've heard guys want to listen to the same music I listen to that weren't black, or want to watch the same movies that I watched if they weren't black, or maybe want to go to the same type of restaurants that I did if they weren't black. On the other side of it, you find yourself doing those things constantly. So it's a lonely experience. And sometimes the further you are away from blackness, the more you are accepted by baseball, which is a shame. But they've created that environment, and with the numbers dwindling the way that they have, it's going to take a leap in consciousness, a leap in awareness to have not just the players, but to have the people who run the game understand that the obstacles that the African-American player is up against, the constant striving that player is doing to become part of baseball, that baseball hasn't really come back and reached his arms around that kid, is something that baseball needs to heighten its awareness to. And I think that's something that needs to be spoken about often, very specifically, and no sugarcoating, because it is a lonely experience sometimes being an African-American in baseball.
And thank you, Preston. And that was an excellent interview in Sports Illustrated, and you were very candid and upfront about what, how you saw the game and how it has disenfranchised African Americans from participating. Does anybody else want to chime in on this question?
Yes, sir. I think Mr. Wilson hit the nail on the head with everything he said. Also, in my experience, is just dealing with kids from different age groups. They get frustrated when they get to high school and middle school because a lot of football coaches, and I'm a football coach, so I can say this: if you have a decent football player that also plays baseball, you don't want him playing baseball. You want him full-time football. And a lot of coaches, they'll be honest, and they'll tell the kid, look, I want you to just focus on football. That's where you're gonna make your money. That's where you're gonna get your scholarship. Baseball is not gonna give you a scholarship. Baseball is not gonna do this. And a lot of football coaches speak so negatively about baseball that it frustrates kids, the kids that like the game. They get to a certain height or a certain weight, and the coaches let them know, look, you're too big to play for baseball. You're too tall to play baseball. And a lot of kids that come talk to me, it's frustrating because, you know, what am I supposed to tell them? If I'm just training them and their high school coach is telling them something different, you know, I just try to, you know, I keep it as real as possible to them. But, you know, there's only so much I can do because at the end of the day, the parents are going to listen to that football coach because that football coach pretty much has their future in their hands because they're going to be the one making the recommendation to those colleges for those kids, you know. So, and I played both sports. So, you know, I know how it goes both ways.
And I agree with that statement. I think that is something I have found when I talk to the pro football players that I work with. They have played more than one sport growing up. Baseball a lot of times is the second sport, and they do get persuaded or dissuaded away from baseball or persuaded to another one. And you know, I find it interesting because a lot of like quarterbacks and other position-oriented players are playing baseball, and they have good arms. They can play certain positions because of what they did growing up as a kid.
Yes, I want to come back in, and if I can you hear me, Mr. Forrester?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Yes, you know, we've had this conversation, Mr. Forrester. One of the main things that I think we have to do, as well as when we talk to these schools, when we talk to these coaches, we have to impress upon them that, yes, even though football may be the easier sport to get into and to go to college for, baseball is a sport that requires reps. And I will caution them with that mentality of, if you play football, you only can play football. When we're on a symposium right now talking about heroes and legends, every person that we talked about being a hero and legend, maybe with the exception of Barry, played other sports in high school. I don't know what Barry did in high school, but I know Jackie Robinson played other sports in high school. I know Hank Aaron played, you know, baseball for sure, and I think he played football as well, basketball. Willie Mays definitely, you know. We got Dave Winfield, who got drafted 4 times in 3 sports. Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders. We have all kinds of examples of athletes that played football and basketball and also were able to play baseball. The difference with baseball is, if you don't get those reps in baseball, you're not going to have a chance to be as good. And I say that because I've seen guys play football after they've gone to play baseball. I played with a guy named Vernon Morrissey, who played baseball in the Colorado Rockies organization, left that because he didn't quite make it, went to Oklahoma State, played football, ended up playing in the NFL for Green Bay for 3-4, I think he got 4 or 5 years in the NFL. Terrell Buckley, I've seen him try to go from football to baseball. That didn't work out. I saw Deion play baseball, decided to quit baseball, continue playing football. You know, so to me, baseball is the one that you have to put the most reps in, simply because football and basketball are so much more specialized. You know, you can do the things in football and really have a specialized job. You don't have to know the whole game. In baseball, you have to know your offense, defense. You have to get the reps in at bats. You have to see pitches. Fielding, you have to see balls in the air, on the ground. It takes many more reps to be able to master baseball, I believe, than the other sports. And also, we're talking about amateur students. You know, they're amateur student athletes. We should not be able to demand that they have to give up something when they're in this amateur status. And a lot of it sometimes is in the interest of the player. But let's be honest, basketball and football are money-making sports for these schools. So they want the best players on the field, getting the best reps. They want to make sure when those lights come on Friday night, or when they're in the gym, they got the best players so they can sell tickets. Right. It's not always about the best interest of that player. So, I mean, I think, yes, there are some football coaches who do this and basketball coaches, but let's make sure we impress upon them that they must keep their mind open to the reasons why. Because there's some great baseball players, and nobody's telling most of the baseball players, if you play baseball, you can't play another sport. because baseball isn't considered a revenue producing sport in most of these schools. But when it comes to football and basketball, for some reason, now that argument gets used, and we have to make sure that we voice that we feel that that's a very strong part of it. Like, these are amateur athletes. They should not be forced to make decisions based on your economics or your economic value as a school or school district.
Thank you, Preston. And before this conversation's over, we're gonna pose the question to you: did MLB respond to your tweet? Because
Okay.
I know you were waiting, so we want to find that out. Okay. The next question is going to go to Michael Paul Williams. You got cut off the first time, Mr. Williams. So we want to get a question in to you, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. We had asked them to send in their questions, and we were going to take a pause to read those questions and let you all address those, and then get back to the additional questions I have for you before it's all over. So, Mr. Williams, do you see an intersection in the issue related to the lack of African-American baseball players in the major leagues and the challenges of systematic racism facing this country today?
Well, yeah. Everything in America intersects with race. I mean, race and racism, systemic racism is the main street of America. It is the foundation on which America was created. So you really can't get past that. I mean, just like we're seeing with the coronavirus, how, that impacts our health chances and how we're being hit hard by this disease. The saying, America catches a cold, we get pneumonia. So if you have a lack of resources, and we are more likely to be unemployed, we have less wealth, far less wealth, we earn less in the way of income. Baseball is a game that requires resources. So yeah, of course, that's going to manifest itself in a lack of opportunity to play sports such as baseball, such as golf, such as tennis, that require resources. You've got to overcome that somehow. It's just a different day and age also, in that, Black people at one point were more rural. And then we had the great migration to the north. And, I still think of baseball as not so much being a city game. Basketball is a city game. Think of baseball as being a suburban game or a rural game. So all these forces kind of work against our participation in the sport. I'd also kind of think that our communities kind of lost our connection to baseball historically. When you talk about these kids, these millennials, these Gen Zers, they don't know a whole lot about our past and how integral baseball was to our past. They don't know the stories. They don't have, we've got to reinstall that connection to the game for them. I think you can sports is always a mirror for society. And I think you can kind of chart African-American progress in America alongside sports, and sports like baseball is a mirror. Jackie Robinson coming into Major League Baseball coincided with the civil rights movement, coincided with the desegregation of the military, Brown versus Board of Education, declaring school desegregation illegal. So you can kind of see our progress going along as a people with the progress we were making in sports like baseball. It's just an integral part of our history. And I don't think baseball does a great job of selling its history in that way. When I see Black people in baseball being celebrated in the past, it's about the Negro Leagues. I don't really see a whole lot about the part of baseball's past that I'm most familiar with in the 60s, in the 70s. Basketball and football are sports that are about stars. I don't see baseball being that way. They don't seem to like to promote the stars. And I think that kind of hurts them in luring our kids to the game when we're talking about role models and heroes. So it's you can almost say that baseball is a microcosm for systemic racism in America, the lack of opportunities in the game, the difficulties getting into management, and just the numbers. It seems like, to me, when we were doing well, when the movement was doing well, when we were seeing demonstrable progress in the 60s and into the 70s, we were doing well in baseball. It seems like once you got into the 80s and the 90s and we started having problems and people wanted to turn back the clock, it seems like that's when we started leaving the game. So I think it very much is kind of a mirror for where we are as a people. And I think we need to reconnect with the game in that way because it's very much an integral part of our history.
Hey, Mr. Williams, thanks for that answer. And it seems like somehow with all the social unrest and the Black Lives Matter, somehow baseball still gets a pass. But anyhow, I'm glad we're addressing this tonight. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? If we're going to have role models and heroes, we have to continue to be a part of the game. So does anybody else want to weigh in before we move on to questions and answers?
Yeah, I'd like to say something along those lines of the role models and heroes. Just sitting back, watching the game and being in baseball, and I'm here with the Reds organization, like I said earlier, and we have a Reds Black professional group here. That's all of the Black coaches. That's all of the Black scouts. That's everybody in the organization. And we're bringing a lot of these different topics that we're talking about tonight, we're bringing them to the table. And we're taking it to the president of the organization and to the owner of the organization, trying to get some changes. Talking about heroes, we got a guy like Mookie Betts who just signed a great deal. He's a great ball player, but when you turn on the television, you can't find a commercial with Mookie Betts. You turn on the television, you see Mike Trout jumping over the fence, robbing home runs. You see LeBron James dunking on people. You see guys scoring touchdowns, dancing in the end zone with their teammates. I mean, what can we do? Like, something has to be done. The numbers are drastically shrinking with African Americans in baseball, and I think it has a lot to do with what our younger kids see when they turn on the TV. What they see guys dunking on people. They see guys celebrating in the end zone. Robbing a home run is pretty fun. I've done it before. Let's put Mookie Betts on the commercial somewhere, so these young African-American kids can see these things. Yes, growing up, baseball is expensive. I know it. Baseball is expensive, and now they got this travel ball that they're doing. And they're recruiting all of these kids to come and play baseball. It's a lot of stuff going on. But we have to do something instead of, and I'm speaking from a personal standpoint. And I used to be the guy who just sat back and was like, you know what, that didn't happen to me, so it really don't apply. Bull crap. If we're going to be leaders, somebody has to stand out front. And I'm willing to do that. But we have to have, instead of talking about all of these things, and I'm not just saying this call, I'm saying the call that I have with the Reds and whoever, something needs to be done. And if it's going to be done, it has to be now. What better time than right now with everything that's going on? I just had to get it off my chest. I'm sorry, guys. Mike, good to see you, man. I remember you from my Richmond days. Good to see you again.
I have a question, if I can, of you, Mr. Harris. I spent a lot of time in Ohio, and I know where Mason, Ohio is. I went to school in Ohio, and I have family there in Cincinnati. But I wanted to ask you about the Players Association, because at one time, baseball was really at the forefront of providing infrastructure of support for their players. And I don't know if they called it player development, but even when they transitioned out of the game into the alumni, it seemed to me that it was pretty strong at one point in time. And this was, I've been in pro sports over almost 25 years. So this goes back a long way back, that baseball had a lot of strength in that aspect, the person in the player. What happened to that?
I think baseball, the Players Union is one of the strongest unions in sports in baseball. I really do believe that. And if Preston is still on this call, I'm sure he can allude to that. The one thing I can say about the players union in baseball is they stick together. I don't think it's necessarily about, African Americans or trying to do things for African Americans. It's a business, and they care about that money. It's about that money. Now they're going to support their players. That's why they're so willing to go on strike. If you notice when these negotiations were going on prior to starting this little abbreviated season, money was the issue. Money was the issue. The owners couldn't come up with an agreement. The players wanted to get full salary on what they agreed upon, as far as they had to take a pay cut. So now, everybody's losing money. Everybody, not just baseball players, but the whole country. And with that being said, I just don't understand how the players union is, they're strong, but these owners are a lot stronger. If they get together, they're a lot stronger, but the players are the product. And if the players aren't willing to play for that pay, we won't have a league. But we just have to do something, I think, to get our heroes back out front, like we were talking about. Get them on the TVs, get them out front. They're willing to do it. They're willing to do it. A guy like Mookie Betts, he should be the face of this game right now.
Well, and I think that's where I'm coming from, in the sense of the publicity, the marketing. We know that media drives a lot of the sports these days. And I just remember when the brawl happened in the NBA, and I was with the NBA at the time. And, they actually weigh out and have formulas to determine the marketability, the profit margins gained from the marketing of particular players. Even though it's a team sport, they recognize the economics behind certain players. And in this day and age, players can market themselves. With social media, they don't need to have the media drive them. They can drive themselves. They can do their own podcasts, their own YouTube things. So there's a big difference. However, to your point, supporting these players, from how I understand the game and promoting it works, if you promote the game, the players are along with that, or you can promote the players and that brings the game along. Either way, there's two issues here. We're talking about a sport, regardless of the race issue. The sport has lost its shine and its popularity in a country where that's what people did for the longest time. Was baseball was the number one in popularity. Now, true, there are other options for sports now. We have tennis and golf and hockey even that have increased in popularity. Soccer certainly as well. But from my standpoint, I'm looking at what it brings to the family, what it brings to the individual. You can get a lot of bang for your buck going to a baseball game compared to maybe a football game in terms of what you have to pay out of pocket. So the economics are definitely a part of it, but I think the players have to take ownership of the game again and be the ones to drive that. If the players, whether they're heroes or not, are willing to make a commitment to save the game that they love so much. From my standpoint, and again, I'm an outsider looking in, but I do think that's what it takes. When the players start taking charge, there's a certain passion, I think, that permeates from them to those that enjoy sports, regardless of whether it's baseball, basketball, or others. When the people who do it have a lot of passion for it, that's contagious.
Dr. Brooks, thank you for that comment. And at this time, we're going to, it's the midway of this conversation. So we're going to let Cal Hobson come in and read the questions that the audience has and let you all address those questions. So Cal, would you please come in and read the questions for us? Kyle, are you on mute?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank
All right, give me 1 second. I'll pull up these questions. Looks like we have quite a few. All right, the first one is for Mr. Preston Wilson. With regards to your comment that the further an individual alienates their Blackness, the more accepted they are to baseball. What can those working with today's youth do to help break the cycle and ensure our kids are able to be their authentic self within the game?
Well, I think that's it. You really have to allow them to express themselves. The problem is not with the kids. The problem is not with the players. You know, in Little Leagues, it's fine. You see that, it's when you get to the high school, college, and pro ball levels where you start seeing this management of person. You start seeing these people try to corral personalities and corral someone's genuine expressions of joy, or just how they express themselves in general. And that needs to stop, because really what they're trying to say is we want baseball to be played our way. And this is not a new concept. And sadly, it's really big in college. It's a really big thing in college. And the reason why it goes into the minor leagues is most of the players who come from college are the players that end up being the coaches, or the players who end up being the managers. You don't really see that many players who got drafted in high school that become coaches or managers or front office people. That's a rare thing. So you have these people who are steeped in these traditions of play the game the right way and do all these things that have nothing to do with being effective on the field. You know, when I was playing USA baseball, 16, 18, I had this one coach who wanted every player off the field in 10 seconds. Now, it didn't matter if you played right field and your dugout was the third base dugout. He wanted you off the field in 10 seconds. So your third baseman, he can just jog in. But if you're playing right field about a fifth or sixth inning, you're dead. But he wanted it because that's how it looks. Oh, that's hustle. No, it's not. That's killing the guys who have the furthest way to run for no reason other than what you feel as baseball should look like. You know, we have these unwritten rules in baseball, and they usually tend to be doled out. The punishment is doled out against players who show their personality, who play with a little bit of flair. And this is not a new concept either. So this is not a new concept either. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that these kids understand it's okay to be yourself. We've seen the campaign in the last couple of years, let the kids play. Baseball is starting to understand that they're losing the younger generation because of the way they stifle personalities. So have those kids be themselves. As long as they're playing hard, as long as they're running the bases right, as long as they're paying attention on defense, as long as they're doing the things that matter to the game and the function of the game, let them be themselves. Let them express that joy. Do not stifle that, because the baseball is moving in a direction right now where those kids are going to be happy because those kids are going to be able to be themselves.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for that passionate answer. All right. Next, we have another question. It says, I'm in my 50s and was introduced to baseball by my grandparents. They sat and watched games with me. Today, parents want to use youth sports as babysitters. Have the older generations let down younger generations by not taking the time to teach them the love of baseball to our kids? And I guess that's for the panel in general.
Well, I can see it both ways. I mean, a lot of parents, some parents, I'm not going to say a lot, but some parents do use youth sports as a babysitting. But there are some parents who actually sit there and take the time to watch their kids practice and play games and take heed to what the coaches are telling them. Like I said earlier, from the kids I've been working with, you know, a lot of parents come ask questions. They want to get feedback. They want me to give them feedback on their kids and how they're doing, how they're progressing. And I love that, because at the same time, I know the parents is interested, and I know the kids are going to stay interested. Because once the parents lose interest, I think the kids are going to lose interest at the same time. And that goes a long way for kids. Kids want their parents to be involved in their lives, especially at a young age.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. For our next question, it looks like it is several parts. It's for Michael Williams. And it says, are you aware of a House bill that would implement something similar to the Rooney Rule for Virginia colleges that have coaching vacancies? All right, that's the first part, and then I'll follow up.
I'm aware of a House bill that would provide resources to support young African-American ball players. I'm not aware of the Rooney Rule component. I'm always in favor of anything that will enhance diversity and give us more of an opportunity to be hired. Hope it doesn't end up like in the NFL where it becomes a form of tokenism where they fly someone into the room for like 5 minutes and just to say they did it. But yeah, I mean, obviously we have a problem. I mean, the kids are not getting the opportunities, the coaches are not getting the opportunities, and I mean, it's become a dirty phrase, but it calls for a level of affirmative action to address that issue. Obviously, there's some deficits at work here, resource deficits mainly, but also deficits of interest and enthusiasm that have to be addressed, deficits of opportunity. And baseball, it's in baseball's interest to do something about it. I think it's society's interest to do something about it.
Okay, and then the additional part of that question, it gives a little bit of background. It says that it is designed to level the playing field by offering free baseball instruction throughout the year to top African-American youth players and would require existing college coaches to attend an African-American based tournament to see these and other Black kids play. It asks, do you know the status of the bill? And then they also want to know the other panelists' take on it and if something like this could be implemented on a national level.
Yeah, the bill is slated to come back up in the January session of the General Assembly. You know, typically, I mean, you know, they say it's like making sausage. You don't want to see legislation be made, really. And, you know, sometimes it takes time for these things to go through, especially when you're talking about, you know, when you're asking for an appropriation. So that's where it is.
Thank you. And to our other panelists, do you have any thoughts on whether something like this could be implemented on a national level?
It could be implemented on a national level. And I think there needs to be a really hard look at the hiring practices when you talk about coaches in NCAA. There's a big disparity between the number of non-Black coaches and Black coaches. There were 301 NCAA programs last year, and there were 13 head coaches that were African American. There were 11 full-time paid assistant coaches that were African American. And when we talk about those head coaches, I believe 7 or 8 of those 13 head coaches were at HBCUs. 5 of those full-time assistant coaches were at HBCUs. So what we're talking about now is we're talking about state schools that are systematically keeping African Americans out of those jobs. So we got government paid discrimination is what it amounts to. There's no justification to say that there's 300 schools or 301 programs that have schools and you have only 13 head coaches. I mean, the African American population is what, 13%. So you should have 13. Basically, if it works the way we think it should work, we should have 13 out of every 100. We got 13 out of 300. So that's not even justifiable to say that, well, it just happened to be that way. No, this is a way of thinking that needs to be changed. They need to be brought to the mat for it. It needs to be put in their face to show that this is not coincidence. This is not just happenstance that these numbers are at the rate that they are. This is systematic and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be changed.
But this thing with COVID is really an opportunity. It's a horrible, horrible thing, this pandemic, but it's an opportunity. It's changing the college sports landscape. the athletes in particular have more power than they've ever had. They are actually talking about boycotting in some of these conferences because they don't want to get out there and play. And it's shifting the balance of power, and it's bringing social justice issues to the forefront. And it's a real opportunity, I think, for the baseball piece to get addressed.
Thank you all very much. We have 5 more questions. Mr. Forrester, would you like to continue with that, or do you want to go back into discussion and then return to questions later?
Let's do one more, and then let's go back to discussion.
Okay. All right, so I'll do it in the order that they were received. This question is from an anonymous attendee. Does the panel feel that Curt Flood is a hero because of his refusal to be traded and taking the MLB to court back in the 70s, opening the path to free agency?
See, that's the piece where I was complaining about us not knowing our history and not passing that history on. Yeah, he's a hero. Nobody gets paid unless Curt Flood did what he did. I mean, he should be celebrated. I mean, the Players Association ought to be called the Curt Flood Players Association. Yeah, I mean, it cost him his career, along with some other things, but yeah, he's talk about civil rights, talk about workers' rights. He should be a household name for that.
Curt Flood is an American hero. He's a Black hero. He's an African-American hero. He's a baseball hero, but he's an American hero. He is someone who took these powerful men to court and Marvin Miller had a great strategy, a great concept of relating that to everyday life and saying that this man should not be held under contract through the rest of it. He should be able to market his skills, be a free market society. We talk about capitalism in its purest form. Well, being able to sell yourself or your skill set to the highest bidder is paramount in that. So Curt Flood is not just Curt Flood is an American hero. He's a hero to capitalism. He's a hero to the American ideal that we say we support all the time. And we should all know who he is. So yes, he's absolutely a hero.
That capitalism piece gets problematic in sports for some people. I mean, someone explain to me the one and done. Can you explain to me why in America, an 18-year-old who has the skills to command a market cannot take advantage of that market?
Well, you know what it is. They've set an economic model based on the production and the play of these kids who do not get paid. And when you say, I heard you say earlier, well, they got new power. No, they've always had the power. They're just realizing how much power they have. So power, the ability to say, no, we're not going to do that, is something that they've never expressed before. They've always had the power to do it. They just didn't know it. And that's the last thing that the NCAA wanted to do, is to have those guys realize their power. That's why they constantly strip things for them, to keep them in this state of survival. They keep those kids hungry. They kept them waiting for the next season. They kept them beholden to everything, because the one thing they did not want is for those kids to realize the power that they have and to realize how dependent upon them and them just showing up that all these universities are under.
Okay, we thank you for addressing the audience questions, and we're going to move on to the last half of our program now. And Kyle, will you cue up the little video we have? And we're going to talk about role models, and we're going to talk about heroes. And it's hard to be a role model or a hero if you don't have the opportunity. Curt Flood was a good person to bring up far as an American hero. But right now, let's look at this quick video, and then we'll talk about it.
Why is it that there are no black managers, no black general managers, no black owners?
Well, Mr. Koppel, there have been some black managers, but I really can't answer that question directly. The only thing I can say is that you have to pay your dues when you become a manager. Generally, you have to go to minor leagues. There's not very much pay involved. And some of the better known black players have been able to get into other fields and make a pretty good living in that way.
Yeah, but you know in your heart of hearts, and we're going to take a break for a commercial, you know that that's a lot of baloney. I mean, there are a lot of black players, there are a lot of great black baseball men who would dearly love to be in managerial positions. And I guess what I'm really asking you is to, you know, peel it away a little bit. Just tell me, why do you think it is? Is there still that much prejudice in baseball today?
No, I don't believe it's prejudice. I truly believe that they may not have some of the necessities to be, let's say, a field manager or perhaps a general manager.
You really believe that?
Well, I don't say that they're all of them, but they certainly are short. How many quarterbacks do you have? How many pitchers do you have that are black? It's same
yeah, but
thing
I mean,
applies.
you know, I got to tell you, that sounds like the same kind of garbage we were hearing 40 years ago about players when they were saying, not really cut out. You remember the days, you know, they hit a black football player in the knees, and you know, no, that really sounds like garbage. If you forget
No,
to say so.
It's not garbage, Mr. Koppel, because I played on a college team, and the center fielder was black, and then the backfield at NYU with a fullback who was black. Never knew the difference of whether he was black or white. We were teammates. So it just might be that why are black men or black people not good swimmers? Because they don't have the buoyancy.
Oh, it may just be that they don't have access to all the country clubs and the pools.
Wow.
Okay. So I wanted you all to see that and then to get your thoughts. This was a turning point for baseball because at that time, there were no black managers. We had very limited opportunity. They took the game completely away from us from when we had the Negro Leagues, when we had managers, we had owners, and not until Al Campanis came forth with these statements did we actually see some change where we now can have additional heroes and role models. So from there, we're going to talk about, has this new social unrest, could that be the next step to make something happen for baseball? And I'm going to open it up to the panelists as a whole on this one.
Well, I think that's yet to be seen when it comes to managers and college coaches. And Preston was, you know, talking about the coaches in the NC2A. You know, I think the mindset is still the same when it comes to black coaches and black baseball players in general. I just don't think they want to hire us. Even at the HBCUs now, they're hiring white coaches. You know, and it's sad to say, but you know, you recruit what you know. And what I mean by that, if you're a white baseball coach, you're going to recruit white baseball players because that's what you know. Because you're not, you know, a lot of white coaches are not used to having black baseball players, a team full of black baseball players. I was a coach for a team and I had all white players. I was the only black person on the team. I had not one black baseball player. And that's because I inherited that team. Somebody asked me to coach that team when I first moved to Dallas. It's an all white team. I was the only black person. And that goes back to the NC2A. Those presidents hire what they think are quote unquote baseball coaches. They think white coaches make the best baseball coaches. They think that's what they think. And I really believe that. And that's why a lot of us not getting those jobs, those big D1 jobs, you know, and those managerial jobs in the major leagues. We're not given the opportunity. We're not given that chance. And I think if we were to get that chance, then we surprise a lot of people. I really believe that.
It's, you know, to me, it's a case where you make the rules and then you also give the excuses. You know, you make the rules by not hiring these people and you set these parameters for it. And then you can also kind of configure the argument to say why they don't have those jobs. You know, it's when you have a fixed game. You know, it's something that we've seen before. But I will say this. One thing this moment has given us is it's given us time to be alone with our thoughts. And I'm talking about us as a nation, because there's always an excuse to ignore something. There's always an excuse to not see something or to look away. And when we have this time where everybody's stuck at home, a lot of people aren't working. We can't go out to restaurants or concerts or movies. We're stuck with ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I mean the human race. So what does that do? It makes us examine ourselves. It's almost like a moment of meditation where all of our thoughts, all of the things that we're going through are now coming to the forefront and we're shuffling through them. And part of it is actually realizing that we have to admit the inequities in a lot of the things that are going on in our country, in a lot of things in our world. We actually have to admit it because we don't have time to look away. We can't say, oh, I got to take Jimmy to baseball practice, so I don't have time to think about that. Oh, you know, we got this concert coming up. I don't have time to think about people killing people. You know, I got this conference I got to go off to. I got to fly out of town. We don't have those excuses. We don't have excuses to ignore the problems of our world or the problems in baseball in itself. So now you're seeing a national consciousness come into play. We're seeing a collective consciousness start to play out where people are having to say, you know what, this is wrong. This is happening. I see this and I can't get away from it. So now I have to say something. And I think baseball is also caught up in that. Baseball is going to have this time. And I do think we're going to look back and see that this is a time where a lot of things change. A lot of people play in NCAA, those football players, they're realizing the power that they have. The baseball, they're realizing that we can say this. We can say your humanity should demand that we have the same amount of chance to get home from an encounter with a cop as you do. Not your Christianity, not your athleticism, not your baseball, none of that. Your humanity should say, you know what? It's wrong that if Preston Wilson gets stopped by a cop, he's less likely to get home alive than Justin Verlander. And we're starting to see that because now we have time to sit and confront it. We have fewer excuses to ignore it or to turn a blind eye to things.
You could hear what Al Campana said probably in any workplace in America. So, I mean, baseball is no different. That's America. I mean, that's not baseball. There's always an excuse why we can't do something, why we aren't equipped to do something. It's systemic.
Okay, well, Dr. Brooks, I'm gonna pose the question to you since we're on this now. Do you believe the major leagues now is more open to bringing more people of color, particularly African Americans, into decision-making positions at executive levels?
I would say cautiously yes. I think when it comes to women of color, I've seen the elevation of women in color in the executive ranks more than I've seen men. There are a number of women that have been in baseball for a number of years in the executive levels. The couple that I've known, and I think you've known one at also is no longer there, I believe, but women have been behind the scenes, even though they don't play baseball. They play softball, but they have been at the ranks and even part of ownership. I think, what is it, Marge Schott, that was with Cincinnati Reds many years ago. But now I think that there is an interest in what women have to say about it, even in the ownership, including here in Dallas, getting more involved in that. You know, the Rangers, well, it's a couple, and the woman is she's very engaged in the business aspects. I don't think it's unique to baseball. I think it's emerging in other baseball, in other sports. Charlotte Jones of the Cowboys, another example. St. Marshall of the Mavericks. We see the elevation of that. So the answer in that aspect is yes. But when it comes to the males of color, I think it's more difficult. In my tenure in pro sports, I think it's been more difficult for me as a woman initially because I was woman more so than being a woman of color. But now I think there is a shift because of the networking that's involved. Women are more collective in that aspect. There's no way I could be a part of the Good Old Boy Network, and I don't think that African American men are invited in being a part of the Good Old Boy Network, which of course with the Rooney Rule, or being in the coaching situation, that's what it takes, is you have to know somebody and be in the intricate partnerships of those relationships, and they really don't stand a chance. But with women, it's very different. They bring a different perspective. And I mean, I personally have experienced it myself, where I get asked to come to teams because of the history that I've had with teams through the years. But in the earlier years, back in the 90s, it was nothing like that, not at all. I was a big threat. Now, I think because of my reputation, I'm not. But my male counterparts that look like me haven't had the same in the same way. But people with my credentials mostly are white male in this, but there are more women of color coming in this. I mean, the NFL requires people with my credentials to be assigned to teams, but I don't see but maybe 1 or 2 out of all of the 32 in the NFL that are Black males. They're black females or females of color, and percentage-wise, a lot more females, and some of them are executives and decision makers, vice president level, but at the teams, no.
Major League Baseball just hired Michelle Myers-Shep. It was announced on August 2nd as their culture officer. She's worked with other big corporations to talk about, basically they have this report card for hiring on gender and race. And in the late 90s, baseball had like 78% white males, and now it's down to like 60-something%. But exactly like you said, the Black male numbers have gone down. The diversity has gone to women or women of color or Latino or Asian or whatever. So that it really supports exactly what you're saying. The Black male is the one that's getting squeezed because the numbers for the white males has dropped just a few percent, but the numbers for the African American males has dropped proportionally greater over the time, because the places where the Black male would fit into those workplaces, they put this all-encompassing label of people of color. Well, a Black male is part of that. So now you have Black males, Black females, Latino females, Latino males, Asian, all of those are under people of color for them. So now the Black male is the one who's getting squeezed out, and those numbers are getting smaller. So yes, you're exactly right.
Okay, my next question is going to be for Coach Taylor. And when we talk about role models and heroes, most of these individuals come to mind when we are kids. And quite often, our coach, our high school coach, our little league coach, they're the ones that are our heroes and our role models as we grow up. You as an African-American coaching baseball, it's somewhat of a rarity now to have a qualified African-American male to come out and work with these young men. When you are with your youngsters, I should say, when you're with these youngsters and you are talking to them and talking about major league ball players that could be their role models. I know we mentioned Mookie Betts, but I mean, who do you talk to? Who do you say this should be someone you should emulate? You should try to pattern your game after them. And if so, is it an African American ball player?
Yes, sir. I talk about that a lot when I talk to kids. I mean, the kids I currently coach, they're 18U. I work with little kids and little leaguers every so often, but most of the kids I talk to are older kids. That's who I coach. But I talk to them about the same thing, and I ask them, especially Black players, I ask them, like, who do you look up to as a baseball player? And, you know, they say the popular names, you know, Clayton Kershaw and Bryce Harper and Mike Trout. They rarely say African-American names. And, you know, when I ask them why, they just say that's who they see on the TV most of the time. you know, and they don't know anything about Dwight Gooden. They don't know anything about, you know, Jimmy Rollins and the players like that. All they know are the ones that's on the commercials, like we talked about earlier, the ones that making all the money. That's all they know, and that's all they talk about. They talk about basketball, and they don't even play basketball. They talk about LeBron James and, you know, all these other players and football players, but they rarely talk about African-American baseball players. And I find it frustrating. And a lot of them, they get to a certain, like I said earlier, get to a certain point, and they just quit playing baseball. But I stay in touch with them. And I talk to him, and I keep talking to him. I got a kid now, he's at the University of Arizona, great baseball player, but he's playing football. I said, you gonna try to play baseball in Arizona? Nah, coach, I'm done with baseball. He was a great baseball player, athletic, big, strong kid. But again, that goes back to what I'm saying. They don't see baseball as their quote unquote make it out sport. It's only football and basketball.
You remember what happened with Russell Wilson, right?
Right.
Remember when his coach made him pick?
Right.
He basically chased an all-conference, all-American quarterback out of school because he wanted him at spring practice, as if Russell freaking Wilson needed to be at spring practice as a senior quarterback.
Right. Even now, I got kids like a shortstop I train. He goes to a predominantly white school. He's a shortstop, middle infielder. And he didn't see the field. He'll be a senior this year. He didn't see the field at all his junior year. And he's a nice baseball player. I'm talking about very nice baseball player. He has the tools. He has the hands. He's a switch hitter. And it's frustrating because his parents, they live up there. They live up north. I don't know if you're familiar with Dallas, but it's one of those north schools, high schools. And, you know, they have a really good baseball team. But he said the only time he gets on the field is the pinch run. So that goes back to what I tell you. Kids get frustrated when they're not given the opportunity to get on the field and show what they can do. And I mean, I don't know what to tell them. I just tell them, you know, to keep working hard and it's hard for them to play travel ball. Like Preston said earlier, it's too expensive. It's way too expensive. You have paid $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 just for the summer for travel ball. Equipment's expensive. Baseball bats now $400 a piece. Baseball gloves are $400. And, you know, parents just, especially African-American parents, they're not trying to spend that money on baseball equipment.
That's where they get sponsorships.
Right. Some of them do. A lot of them don't know how. And a lot of them are afraid to even ask about it.
Well, we can talk because I'm in Dallas.
All right, let's do it.
I'm going to go to Preston's point earlier about the diversity. You know, you do have a large number of Hispanics playing baseball now. We got large Dominican population playing baseball. Is it possible that baseball views itself as having a vested interest in keeping their sport as white as possible? And maybe they don't want it to become football, which is predominantly black, or basketball, which is overwhelmingly black. And maybe they view, you know, okay, the black slots have been taken by the Hispanics. I mean, is that possible?
Is this for Willie or can I jump in here? All right, okay. So I've done a lot of research on this whole how we got here as far as the numbers and what it means to baseball. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna go through a little bit of it right here. Number one, we had a time where baseball had to acknowledge us. Why? Because we had our own teams, we had our own schools, and I'm talking about segregation. And I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of people, but this is a very important factor in how we got where we are. Before integration happened, we had our own teams, we had our own schools. What does that mean? It means that there had to be a black catcher. There had to be a black pitcher. The guy who's on the bench that was just a coach's friend was going to be a black kid. So how does that translate? Well, when integration happened, we lost the ability to make those decisions because even though the students migrated to these other schools, one of the biggest professions that took a hit in the African-American community was teachers. And you know, the teachers, they coach at the black schools. So when you had the players migrate, you didn't have the teachers or the administrators migrating. So you didn't have the people who have the empathy for those kids. You didn't have the people who were willing to listen to their stories or think they fit in. Like Willie said, the coaches pick who they know or these administrators pick who they know. Well, if the administrators from these black schools, the principals, the vice principals, the psychologists, the counselors, the kids don't have that backup. They don't have those people that they can go to and talk to. How does that translate into baseball? It translates into baseball in this way. When you have mostly white coaches in high school baseball, like we have in this country, that's due to a few things. Number one, the bigger schools are hiring mostly white teachers. And a lot of districts, I think almost all of them in this country have a rule, well, if you don't teach, you can't coach. So now you've lost the ability to connect with these black kids. So that's one thing that's pushed them away, because now you don't have a coach that empathizes with you, or if something happens to you, you're more likely to get punished instead of getting a talk if you're a black kid. You're more likely to get suspended in an altercation instead of just detention if you're a black kid. So all of these things kind of play into it, and that translates over to the baseball field as well. So we've lost black players in that manner. Now, what baseball has to do is they have to admit that money needs to go into this, and there needs to be an awareness, an awakening from the level of high school to say, we need to make sure that you're understanding that these black kids are being deterred away from baseball in a way where it's not just economics, but it's also on a psychological level. It's also on a level of empathy. And how does baseball fix that? How do they prove that they want to do that? They have to put money into it, bottom line. Just like they go to these South American countries or these Latin American countries and build these baseball facilities that they house 80 to 100 kids, and they feed them and hope that some of them filter out. They're going to have to do something similar to that to people who are economically challenged in this country. And how do you do that? You know what? You can do something based on income, where the support that you get or the help that you get financially is based on your income. That would be something they can do. It's going to take a radical idea to change what we've lost. We lost it in, when I said integration. We also lost it in Title IX. That was another way where money was taken away from African Americans who wish to play baseball. So we have a lot of things that got us to this point, and we need to really examine it and look at it, because we can talk about having players all we want, and we could talk about if they're interested all we want. But the truth of the matter is we need to examine the root problems of how we got here. And how we got here is when segregation ended, we lost the ability to control who gets the jobs, who are the coaches, who can empathize with these kids. When Title IX came in, we lost the ability to say, baseball is a viable option for me to go to college for a lot of these kids. We lost that. Travel ball came in. If you can't get a sponsor, you're not going to get to play at high school. Why? Because these coaches tend to only want to coach players that are more seasoned. And because high school sports has become a win now thing. It's not a develop a player thing anymore. Before it used to be, okay, let's let this kid, get a couple years. We'll bring him along. Maybe by his junior, senior years, he'll start to play. That doesn't happen anymore because these coaches want to win now. So when they'll go get that kid that may not have as high a ceiling from travel ball, but he's more seasoned. He's going to make the more routine play. He may not get any better past high school, but he can make the routine play. So they're going to go and play those kids instead of taking a chance on a kid that has the athletic ceiling, of a Mookie Betts or, of a Willie Harris or a Preston Wilson that just hasn't played as much. And he may embarrass him every now and then because he's going to misplay because he doesn't know the game, but the potential is there for him to become an incredible player. They're not taking those chances because now high school sports has become a win now thing, not a develop an athlete thing. I won't get any more into it. I got more, but we have to understand how we got here and why the numbers are so low. And it starts with economics, and it also becomes the opportunity factor. We've stripped those away from the African-American family.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. I'm going to pose this one to Dr. Brooks. Dr. Brooks, psychologically, for a young African-American teenager that wants to play baseball, he's forced now to play what Coach Taylor just mentioned and Preston just mentioned on a travel ball team that is 99% white. He's quite often, he's the only black. It could be 2 on the team. Psychologically, what does this do to this young man who needs to identify himself as being a proud African-American male. What does that do? How does that affect him?
It makes him, no, this is what it does. There's a saying that I was once told, because as you know, growing up the way I grew up after we moved where we did, I was the only and the lonely in a number of things that I did. So one day I was lamenting that. I made a point to follow my dream and what I believed in. So a doctor once said to me, how is it go? Wait a minute, I got it right here, because you will recognize this, and I think it's important to the listener. And this is the doctor I'm referring to, 5 Lessons in Life. And the one that I'm referring to, it says, why fit in when you were born to stand out? So I was once told by someone, if you're going to stand out, be outstanding. So to me, that young man, if he loves the game, he's going to play the game every chance he gets. And that's going to help him become a better player. The person that he is within that player is based on his village, is based on his family, is based on those that sow into him. Now, you have walked in those shoes. I have walked in those shoes. Mr. Williams has walked in those shoes, and a number of others that are listening as well as are on the panel, I would surmise. And I strongly believe that has made me be the first in a lot of things that I've done. Is it hard? Yes. Am I afraid? Yes. But I was working with the Dallas Cowboys back in the 90s. People didn't know I was a part of it until I had just about left. And I allowed one person to tell my story first, and that was Michael Williams. Now that same team came back to me after I left 16 years ago. Okay, they came to me on both occasions. So I think that says something about the impact I had, and I had no idea. I really didn't. That's how naive I was, but I'm doing the things that I loved, not because of me being gifted or talented or special, but I had a village of people behind me that were the wind beneath my wings. When I went to New York to work for the NBA, cover the entire league, that wasn't me alone doing that. That was because what was sown into me growing up was people that believed in me, more so at times than I believed in myself. Now, I've done a TED Talk on my story and shared some things that no one knew about what happened to me when we moved from the city back out into the county. So being the only is hard. But if that's something that you love and you want to do, you're not going to let something like that stand in your way. So when I was at Hermitage High School and the only Black in my classes, I made a point to do my reports on people like Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, people that I knew I wasn't going to read about in the books. But that was because of the people who sowed into me and wanted me to know who I was, not just as a female, as if that would make a difference, but also because as a woman, a young woman and a woman of color growing up in the Confederate capital, former Confederate capital of the South. So I really am very passionate when I say this, because being a woman in the locker room back in the 90s with the Dallas Cowboys, you can only imagine what that was like. You can imagine going to New York and having to convince the front office of these teams to spend money on players that they're not going to have any profit margins on. So I go to Wall Street and get a senior vice president from Morgan Stanley to let me use the formula from his book, Asset Management, and I know nothing about financial investment, and convince these owners, all of whom are white males, to spend money on these player development and programs to support their players. That's not going to give them money, make them money, but they are the assets that they have invested in. And if they want them to be productive, they have to have the infrastructure of support to help them deal with the issues and the stressors that they encounter as professional athletes, because they don't get the mentoring and the nurturance that the counterparts would experience growing up. So they don't have that cultural exposure. And that's why a lot of them would struggle as they would get into the pros and have all this money and don't know how to manage that and don't know how to identify people to help them develop that infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? Okay, if not, my last question before we go to the final Q&A, we're gonna give this to Michael Paul Williams. And of course, everyone feel free to jump in after Mike says what he has to say. In the light of the social unrest and protests around Black Lives Matter and the racial issues in this country, what is Major League Baseball's future as it relates to African-American baseball players? Participation, involvement at the professional level.
Well, I think I can't really separate Black Lives Matter and what's happened with that from COVID and the pandemic. I think it's all kind of interwoven, intertwined. I think we wouldn't have had BLM without the pandemic and the way it kind of laser focused us on you know, and I think Preston spoke to it earlier. It made us, put us in a state of meditation where we had to think about some things and there weren't the distractions and you couldn't look away when George Floyd's getting choked out. So I think it's exposed a lot of our flaws and our shortcomings and the things that just aren't working anymore. And I'm going just beyond everything. I mean, this is way beyond baseball. Exposed how our healthcare is just appalling. Just that we don't offer to everyone like every other developed country in the world does. It's exposed how much we rely on our education system. I mean, basically society doesn't work without it. You know, parents can't go to work. You know, if the Black kids and brown kids can't go to school, they might not even get a meal, or the poor kids, it's exposing everything. So I'm kind of a mindset, we just need to blow all this stuff up. I mean, nothing should be off the table as far as how we move forward, because it's so obvious that in so many ways we have allowed racism to make this country just utterly inefficient, unproductive, unsustainable. And that goes down to sports. You know, the nation is changing. I mean, Donald Trump is trying to do everything he can to forestall it, but it's becoming an increasingly diverse nation. And, you know, what's that going to look like in 20 or 30 years when you have a nation that's majority people of color, but you have a sport that does not reflect that? So it is in baseball's interest as far as its survival for it to better reflect the nation in all its ranks, from on the playing field and the management field, in the executive suites. I think moving forward, and this is not going to be over real soon. The pandemic's not going to be over real soon. Sorry to tell you. And this BLM ain't going to be over. We're in for a long slog on both fronts. But nothing can look like it looked before. And I think the industries that don't reflect America and don't have Black lives in mind are not going to survive. I think it's just not going to be acceptable anymore. And so baseball is going to have to get with it. Baseball has gotten away with being a 20th century sport in the 21st century. And it's going to have to move into the 21st century.
Anybody else on that one?
I think we need to make sure that we are engaging correctly in the right way to get things going in the right direction. And one of the things when we talk about our schools and the funding and all of that, I think one of the things we need to push for is we got to change the way that our schools are funded as a nation. And I think that's something that we all have to look at, because the disparity in education and the quality of education is based on laws that really no other industrialized nations, no other first world nations really do. And which is exactly base school funding on property taxes. It's a built-in divider for classes. It's a built-in way to ensure that wealthier families maintain the better education. You know, we have to make sure that, and that's why I talked about integration. That's why everything that I talk about, I try to talk about how we got here in the root of it. In the way that we got here with our schools and our education, with all of that, funding our schools by property taxes is a bad thing. And that's something we need to work on to really keep in focus as far as making things better.
Okay. Well, we have about 9 minutes left. So I'm going back to Cal Hobson, and hopefully we can get maybe 1 or 2 more questions in before we have to wrap up. So Cal, back to you.
Right. Looks like we have 4 questions submitted. The first one is, how do you feel about the statement, "I'm not being paid to be a role model to your kids, but to wreak havoc on the opponent"? And that's for anyone in the panel.
I mean, honestly, it's nice when a guy's a role model, but to be honest, he's not. Like, we have to stop looking at celebrities as as the people who are the moral authorities in this world. And that goes for athletes too. It's wonderful when a Hank Aaron or a Jackie Robinson has those, but we also should not make it incumbent upon those people to be that. Because let's be honest, some people, I'm not listening to them. Like, I love Charles Barkley and I think he's entertaining, but I wouldn't let Charles Barkley like write a pathway for my life. No, I'm not doing that. You know, I love Michael Jordan, but some of the ways that Michael Jordan went about his way, I'm not going to teach my kids to be that way. So we have to make sure that we're not hanging our morality on people because they entertain us. Now, if they do so, that's great, but that should not have to be imperative in this process.
I think that's changed. I don't think that kids idolize the athletes and entertainers like they have in the past. Number one, because of social media, the things that they put out are very real, very raw. And, you know, the teams track these players. They, you know, they track their accounts. They see what kinds of things that they put out. Some of the teams capture that and put it out on their websites, what the players are saying. So I do think, though, with the elite athletes, that what people watch are the lifestyle, the trends, the fashions, the things that are age appropriate, well, most of the time age appropriate. They want to see all of it, the transparency. So they put it all out there. That's where you have the real lives of the wives, of the girlfriends, of the guys, of whatever it is, God. The next show. You know, everybody wants their moment to have the spotlight. And I think that's what they go after, the spotlight. Even the family members of the players. I mean, it's like, we want to be a part of that spotlight too. We want to be relevant. We want to be important. We want to be valued. And I think some of that is a socio-psychological aspect in how kids are raised, where you have blended families. You have, you know, how many siblings do you have? 12, 14, you know, from my perspective, that's not a new thing in the African-American culture, because you go back to slavery and, you know, kids were raised in a village mentality anyway, when they would be separated from their biological parents and sold off. But the other aspect of that is, I love the village mentality, and my work in the military has really opened my eyes about the multicultural aspects of the lifestyles in the military. Not that it's a perfect environment, but the military and the VA system is probably one of the most culturally diverse environments I've ever worked in, because you have the blending of races and cultures. When people are exposed globally to different experiences that they otherwise would not have, yet they come back to America and it's very segregated in so many ways. But I do think that the kids are more open-minded in a global mindset, that they're more tolerant of a lot of things that my generation or my parents' generations were not so as much. There's good and bad in that, but I don't think they're as naive as maybe my generation might think they are.
All right, thank you all very much for those answers. So our next question is, how can our African-American kids compete when the MLB team set up camps in the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Venezuela for kids that are 16 years old?
That's a good question. I coached in Dominican Republic, and it's different mindset, different mentality over there for those kids. They grow up to play baseball. That's their ticket. And when I say that's their ticket and their mentality, they do baseball all day, every day. When I first moved to Dallas, I took an 18U team to the Dominican Republic to play. All my kids were 17, 18 years old. We went over there and played in a tournament. 13 and 14-year-old kids, and we didn't win not one game. The talent is so abundant over there, and they're so hungry that they work at it. They work at it every day. And I think that's the difference between the kids over there and our kids. Our kids don't have that mentality. We have the cell phone, we have video games, and those kids over there, they don't have that. So they do baseball all day, every day. They have schools where they live on campus. They go to school, they come out, they go play baseball. I coached at Boca Chica at the Professional Baseball Academy over there. And those kids that I worked with woke up, ate breakfast, went to the baseball field. Went to lunch, took a nap, went back to the baseball field. All day, every day. I just think our kids' mentality just has to change. I'm sorry, Preston. I think our kids' mentality needs to change when it comes to putting forth that effort and putting in that work when it comes to the game of baseball. Because baseball is a year-round sport. It's a year-round sport. Like Preston said earlier, man, you got to get reps. And not just reps, but I'm talking about perfect reps. And I tell kids all the time, a lot of kids talking about practice makes perfect. I tell kids all the time, practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. And a lot of our kids don't get that. They just go out and they think taking ground balls all day is good. I said, it's not good if you're taking it the wrong way. If you're going up to the plate and you stepping in the bucket every time you swing, that's not, if you're taking 100 hacks, that's not making you better. But kids over there, they get that work and they get the teaching and the tutelage from different players that come in and work with them, and they get paid to come in and work with those kids.
When I hear people say that about, you know, American kids or Black kids not being hungry, wanting to play, I always offer this. What would America look like without basketball and football? Because Dominican doesn't have basketball and football as major sports. If you only had baseball and soccer here, how would their hunger look? How would their dedication look? I think right now we just have more options for these kids to explore. They don't have those options. They're forced to play baseball. So I don't want to talk bad about our kids in a way and say they don't have the passion for it. I just think they have other options. They have other things that are catching their interest. Because if you took basketball and football away from baseball, you'd see some incredible baseball in this country by Black kids.
I agree. That goes back to what I was saying about the video games and you know, the other sports. Those, like you said, those kids don't have that over there. They don't. That's a big point. Major options, different, very different.
Cal, we're gonna have to cut it off now because it is now 9:59, and we said we would only go 2 hours, so we don't want to keep our panelists up all night and away from what they have to do. So I want to thank Dr. Brooks for taking her time to be with us. He gave us some excellent insight tonight. Coach Taylor. Another person from the Dallas area. You got two from the Dallas area, and hey, thank you very much for coming in. Very candid remarks, insight into the game and youth baseball. Michael Paul Williams, thank you very much for taking your time to be on here tonight. We want to thank Mr. Willie Harris for being on. And then finally, we want to thank Mr. Preston Wilson. And we have one more question for you before we go. Did the commissioner ever get back with you? Did he ever respond to your tweet?
The commissioner did not get back with me, but I have heard from the Players Association. I have heard from the Players Alumni Association. And I will say this, we talked a little bit about players controlling whether they get endorsements or not, or really trying to get themselves out there because the league doesn't promote them. There's a couple things coming. The Players Association has a couple of alliances or coalitions, if you will, set up that the players are doing themselves, the Players Association, to promote themselves, to get the Black players or other players throughout the game promoted through these products and endorsements and sponsorships. So you're going to see more players from Major League Baseball get endorsement deals. That'll be coming.
It's great, and it's great that we have a voice to advocate for African Americans with you, Preston. So we certainly appreciate that. One last thing, we did miss the moderator, Mr. Marvin Jackson. He was supposed to be here, but was unable to be with us tonight. So we hope to have him back sometime on some future endeavor. So again, thank you all. Appreciate it, and I think it was great conversation. And hopefully, this conversation will not only just be conversation, but will lead to some change. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.